Good morning and good evening. It's a pleasure, delight, and honor to have with us today Pirzia Inayat Khan. He's the president of the Inayat Order and the Suluk Academy. And we have had the privilege of hosting him in the past when we were meeting in person at MIT. And I'm really delighted that he accepted our invitation to join us to close this series on meditations with invited friends and speakers. And I hope that you all have received some insights, some thoughts that have helped clarify your own understanding of meditation and meditation practices. And in that spirit, without further ado, Pirzia, thank you so much again for joining us, and you're on.
Thank you so much, dear friend, Venerable Tenzin Ji. It's an honor to be here with you today and a delight to meet this company of friends in different parts of the world. I've been missing you, Venerable Tenzin. I used to live closer to where you are and we would see each other more often. And I hope we'll have the chance to meet again soon. But meanwhile, I'm so glad that we can meet this way. So today I would like to tell you, all of you, a little bit about a practice that was taught by my grandfather, Hazrat Pir Murshid Inayat Khan. Hazrat Inayat Khan was the first to bring the Sufi tradition to the Western world. He traveled to North America in 1910 and onward to Europe, and in fact stayed for some time in Moscow, where his first child was born. I see that a number of you are from Russia, so we have that connection. He enjoyed his time very much in Moscow and collaborated with the son of Tolstoy on an opera based on a Sanskrit play by Kalidasa. Hazrat Inayat Khan subsequently established himself in London and founded the first Sufi order in the Western world. And we are continuing his legacy to this day. Sufism might be familiar to some of you and perhaps not to all of you, but perhaps I'll simply say that it is the mystical path embedded in the heart of Islam, and at the same time a path that finds itself in deep accord with the essence of all of the world's great revealed traditions, and a path that has sought common cause with the sages of all spiritual lineages, including Buddhism. There isn't time today, but one could go very far in exploring the historical connections between Sufis and Buddhists on the Silk Road. So Hazrat Inayat Khan, my grandfather, brought the Sufi tradition to the West in the early 20th century. And he brought with him a repertoire of mystical practices that had developed down the centuries, originating in Arabia, developing further in parts of the Middle East, in Persia, in Afghanistan, and really finding full flower in India, where the meditative dimension of the tradition was explored in great detail and elaborated with great refinement. The Sufis in India were particularly in contact with the Natpanti, is related to the nafs, which means the self. Self in Arabic is nafs, breath is nafas. Our identity is profoundly a product of the deep tide of the continuous rhythm of the inhalation and exhalation. And the more profound, the more expansive the breath becomes, the vaster the states of identity that we can experience. So our self is not a fixed thing. It's a product of the character of our breath at a particular moment. Hence the need to watch the breath, to guard the breath, to cultivate the breath, to purify the breath. And even the divine being, known in Arabic as Allah, carries within its name a secret of the breath, because the name Allah is spelled Aleph, Lam, Lam, Ha. And Aleph, Lam, A-L, in Arabic is the definite article, meaning the. When the Lam is doubled, A-L-L, it means the only. The only. So Aleph, Lam, Lam, the only. The only. That's the secret of the divine name in Sufism. The breath of all breaths. And creation is understood as the nafas ar-Rahman, the outflow of the breath of infinite compassion, the great sigh that brings all manifestation into appearance. So breath is a fundamental aspect of our tradition, so much so that my grandfather's murshid, his teacher, said, in this path there is only one virtue and one sin. The virtue is the breath breathed in awareness of the one, and the sin is the breath that escapes in heedlessness. So watching the breath, cultivating attention on the breath is primary, and we try to keep that up all through the day, and to notice then when the breath becomes shallow, tense, arrhythmic, and bring it back into a natural rhythm, deepen it, expand it. In that way, one can move through all kinds of experiences and states and not get stuck in those states. So how do we animate the breath and vitalize it and energize it? Well, there are a number of techniques, and Hazrat taught a series of methods, and they're not all to be practiced at once. You begin with those first things that are fundamental and gradually build up capacity. But a very basic practice that he taught, which can be practiced by anyone, is one that I would like to introduce to you today. And we call it the elemental purification breaths. Now, just a little more historical background on the elemental breaths. Some of you who might have some familiarity with yoga might have heard the term tattva shuddhi, purification of the elements. So in yoga, that is, in some traditions, a daily practice of purification. And the purification breaths in Sufism are of that kind, and in fact seem to have emerged out of this communion between Sufis and yogis in India. So for Sufis, nature and the mineral and vegetal animal worlds, and even the winds and the mountains and the seas, everything that you might find in the world around you is numinous, is living, is sacred, is angelic. And so this vision of life challenges our contemporary idea of a inanimate world, a world lacking soul, lacking spirit, a kind of clockwork, mechanical machine in which forms appear as a result of accidental collisions between particles. The Sufi vision of the universe is one of being, revealing itself providentially and communing with itself. And the elements are conceived as angelic beings. Earth, water, fire, and air are God's servants, says Maulana Rumi, Jalaluddin Rumi. Earth, water, fire, and air are God's servants. To us, they seem lifeless, but to God, they are living. Everything is living, everything is animate. And the Sufis call the elements shahid al-wujud, witnesses of being. And witnessing is fundamental to this vision of life, to bear witness to all that is around us and within us, and to see, in fact, that really the witness is one witness, instead of considering ourselves as the subject and all else as an object. You see, everything has its subjectivity, everything has its own angle of vision. And ultimately, all of these angles of vision accrue to the one being that knows life through every possible modality simultaneously. And so this helps us to awaken out of the limitations of our egoic exceptionalism, attribution to ourself of a kind of solidity and permanence and centrality. We're challenged in this and enabled to see everything as living and experiencing life in its own way, and everything, as it were, a wave in one ocean, which is the divine being experiencing and realizing itself. So the practice is done in this way. One does it in the morning, and one is advised to, if at all possible, step outside, or at least open a window to get fresh air. So this is a practice that connects you with nature. One wants to feel the breeze on your face. One wants to, if possible, go barefoot and feel the ground under the soles of your feet. One wants to watch the trees unfurling their leaves and blossoming in the spring, or in the winter, feel the snowflakes falling on your head. It's a practice of opening yourself to nature, to the elements every day, every morning, getting fresh air, getting fresh sunlight. So you step outside or open the window, And of course, you've woken up, you've done your ablutions, you've washed yourself, you've had a glass of water first thing before anything else, just a glass of pure water. And then you step into the fresh air, and you have to be present. That's a very important orientation in Sufism. Huzur is the word. Even the title of my grandfather, the title of sages in Sufism, Hazrat, means one who is present, Hazrat. And there's a whole art to ilmi huzuri, which is to say the knowledge gained by presence, not that knowledge which is gained by collecting information, but that knowledge which comes by direct witnessing through immediate, non-representational awareness. So you make yourself totally present in this time, in this place. Feel your feet touching, the soles of your feet touching the ground, the crown open to the sky, the spine is straight. Then you start to breathe deeply, rhythmically. And then you move into the practice itself, and we'll do this practice, but basically the practice goes through the four elements one by one: earth, water, fire, and air. And at the very end, you sense ether, which is the void from which they all emerge and into which they all dissolve. Now, each of these elements you experience in your body, in your mind, and in the landscape all at once. So you feel that your body is a microcosm of the landscape. You're not separate. It's like the whole landscape miniaturizes itself in you. And whatever exists in the sky, in the rivers, in the mountains, in the stars, it's all right here in your body. And you feel the sympathies, the correspondences between what is within your body and what is all around you. Likewise, you feel the sympathies, the correspondences between what is in your body and what is in your mind. The body influences the mind influences the body, and that is because there is a certain affinity, a certain likeness between the, you might say, more gross and more subtle dimensions of one's embodiment. And the elements describe these commonalities. So in the body, earth is bone and flesh. In the mind, earth is patience, humility, kind of steadiness, mental steadiness. So there are parallels, and we experience this. So the practice has the dual effect of harmonizing what is within you and what is outside, and at the same time harmonizing the four elements within you, because they have different natures and different personalities tend toward one or the other of the elements. So you might know someone, for instance, who's very fiery. You meet that person and they're full of enthusiasm and tend to get angry very often, but they're also just full of zest and ardor. Well, that's one kind of personality. Then you see someone else that's just very kind of slow and calm and hardly, initiates anything or moves very far, but is reliable and is very solid kind of person. There's an earth person. So you see, we all have these different tendencies, but if we want to become more and more whole, then we've got to find a way to have all of them in ourselves and not just keep leaning only into one element, but to balance the elements. So if we begin our day by balancing the elements, it's a way to cultivate an equilibrious personality. So these are some of the benefits of the practice, but rather than saying much more, I think it would be beneficial perhaps to just go right into the practice. So if you're ready, I invite you to settle in, sitting upright rather than leaning back. Sit upright, and if you feel comfortable doing so, you could close your eyes. You might be carrying a weight in your life, carrying a burden. And if you find in your moment that there's something weighing on you, you could just take it off your shoulders and set it down on the ground for now. Of course, you can always pick it up again whenever you wish. But for now, just set it down and let your shoulders open up. Let your chest open up. Feel the space between your shoulder blades. And even feel the space between your ribs. If you're sitting in a chair and your feet are on the ground, then just feel the soles of your feet touching the earth. Your tailbone rooted in the earth. And above, the crown open to the sky. And between the tailbone and the sky, the spine is like a ladder. Like Jacob's ladder in the Bible, on which earth angels ascend to the heavens and heavenly angels descend to the earth. Or you could say the dense and the visible ascends toward the vast and invisible, and the vast and invisible descends toward the dense and visible. And there's a mingling between them, all carried out along the vertical axis, which is the channel of the spine. As we breathe out, we're aware of the breath spiraling out into the distance. Each exhalation going further and further toward the far horizon. And as you inhale, conversely, the air that's swirling around you enters through the nostrils, descends, fills the lungs, moves through the bloodstream, penetrates every cell of the body, right down into the tips of the toes. As you inhale, the belly rises and then the chest rises. And as you exhale, the belly contracts and the chest contracts. The whole torso is undulating gently. One is emptied and filled, emptied and filled, as the belly rises and falls. On the exhalation, one's presence is diffused to the point that at the culmination of the exhalation, it's as though one has lost all personal identity. Whereas the inhalation is a gathering in that reconstitutes you. But you experience yourself no longer as a monolith separate from what is outside, but something more like a vortex in which the whole universe is converging, only to spin out again. And let the rhythm of the breath become familiar, both calming and exhilarating at the same time, like the rhythm of the waves that lap against the sand on the seashore. And in addition to this rhythm, one may be conscious of a simultaneous rhythm unfolding itself within your chest, namely the beating of your heart. Now we're ready to enter into the breaths of the elements. And the first is the earth element. This breath is done breathing as we're already breathing in through the nose and out through the nose. Now the direction of this breath is horizontal. It spreads out. Energetically, it spreads out. Like a carpet unrolled across the land. We identify with earth. We're conscious of the skeleton within us, our bones, which are kindred to the stones of the landscape. And the muscle in us, which is akin to the clay of the earth. Our bones and flesh are stone and soil. So we witness the dense element in the body, how this body is a thing of fashioned clay, a figure of clay. It belongs to the fertile soil of the earth and will decompose again into the earth one day. In our psyche, we discern the character of rock. Ponderous weightiness, intransigence, but also patience, humility, stability. Kind of gravitas, a heaviness. And whatever you are carrying in excess, whatever is burdensome, let it sink down to the earth. The earth receives, composts and transforms it. So we return to the earth our surplus, our excess, and at the same time inhale from the earth the vital chthonic magnetism that wells up, particularly in springtime. The tailbone is sunk down in the earth like a deep taproot. The light of the earth is envisioned as a yellow light or an ochre light, the color of autumn leaves falling, disintegrating. But now we move to the next breath, and that is the breath of water, which is breathed in through the nose and out through the mouth. So whereas previously the direction of the breath was horizontal, spreading, now one finds the breath descends like a cascade, like a waterfall. As water tends to pour down. And we're conscious of the liquid dimension of our body, the blood and lymph continuously circulating through all of the limbs of our body. Not visible on the surface, and yet making up the greater part of our anatomy. This liquid element, which is consanguineous with the water that is at this very moment flowing through the pipes in your house, flowing through rivers and streams nearby, churning in the ocean, descending from the sky as drizzle. It's all one water. The same water pours through your body as pours through the river. We ourselves are riverbeds, you might say, for that great hydrological cycle, that ceaseless, purifying, vivifying flow of water. So you open yourself to it, be purified by it, let all residues be swept away, be cleansed by an inner ablution. Witnessing the generosity, the kindness, and the sympathy that is in water. Water is gentle, forthcoming, inherently empathetic. So you touch on the watery dimension of your psyche. Ever flowing. And the light of water is visualized as green. Visualize a green light, the color of an oasis. But now we go on to the next breath, and that is the breath of fire, which is breathed inhaling through the mouth and exhaling through the nose. Inhaling, you sip the air as a burning flame drinks in oxygen to fan its fire. Sip in the air and then exhaling through the nose, radiate, glow, burn. So you see the direction, the energetic direction is reversed now. The flame rises, ascends from below, flashes up toward the sky. Aware of the caloric intensity in your body, the heat that pervades your flesh and emanates out into the surrounding air. You are a living flame. It's really solar energy burning in you. What you've eaten has eaten the sun. The plants consume sunlight through photosynthesis, and we unleash the energy and the sugars of plants in all that we eat, and we burn. So the sun burns in us, and you feel a kinship with all burning things, with burning candles and fires and strong rays of sunlight. Fire is ardent and passionate, full of conviction. An old saying goes in Arabic, Al-ishq narun idha waqa'a fil qulub ahraka ma siwa al-mahbub. Love is a fire that when it befalls the heart, burns away all but the beloved, transforming form into radiance. more and more your spine might feel like a chimney within which a flame is rising. And the color of fire is red. But now we move to the next breath, breathing now, inhaling through the mouth and exhaling likewise through the mouth. This is the breath of air. We're co-breathing with all the green things of the world, inhaling their exhalations as we breathe out to feed their inhalations, and all around us is this shared atmosphere of interbreathing which constantly pervades our bodies. Air is invisible, almost untouchable, and yet ever present and vitally necessary to our life, saturating us without and within, flowing constantly, invisibly, sweeping away dust, elevating the psyche. The direction of the air breath is every which way, zigzag, up and down, side to side, a chaos. So we're beyond fixed structure now, beyond fixed form. Instead of structure, choreography. And freedom. Air brings with it a sense of purity and exaltation and freedom from constraint, freedom from narrowness, a vast sky. Inspiration. One's very sense of oneself is expanded, subtilized, given over to the breeze. And the color of air is blue, the color of the sky. Now let this too go and breathe at once through nose and mouth. One hardly notices one is breathing anymore. The breath is so gentle, so subtle, so diffuse. Air dissolves into space itself, limitless, boundless, undefined space, beyond name, beyond form, present everywhere but unsensed. Yet somehow intuited. Earth, water, fire, and air, emerging from, residing within, dissolving back into the purest spaciousness of ether. Feel your 2 feet on the ground. We're conscious of all that transpires around us, our senses awakening to this moment and all that it bestows. And we lift our hands as though holding up a bowl and say, "Beloved Lord, Almighty God, through the rays of the sun, through the waves of the air, through the all-pervading life in space, purify and revivify me, and I pray, heal my body, heart, and soul." Lift the hands up over the head and bring them down. And when you're ready, we can open our eyes. And this concludes the practice. Now, because we've done the practice together, there were various descriptions offered along the way of different aspects of the elements. But if you do this practice on your own, it's more simple. Just do 5 breaths of for each of the elements. 5 breaths earth, inhaling through the nose and out through the nose. 5 breaths of water, inhaling through the nose and exhaling through the mouth. 5 breaths of fire, inhaling through the mouth and exhaling through the nose. And 5 breaths of air, inhaling through the mouth and exhaling through the mouth. Then pause in ether, and then one closes with the prayer. So this is a practice that is open to anyone who wishes to practice it. And at the same time, I wish to respect the integrity of every school and tradition and recognize that perhaps many of you are working within a particular tradition. You have a teacher who has given you a course of instruction and a daily practice to do. And so it is very important to stay focused on what is given to you in your particular transmission by your teacher. At the same time, it can be interesting to learn how different traditions practice. And you might sometimes find that there is something that resonates so much that you might approach your teacher and say, this was shown to me, and maybe the teacher will say, yes, this is something that is congruous with our work. It's something you can do. Or the teacher might say, stay focused, please, on what we're doing together, because that is your particular assignment. So it's important to have a guide on the path and to be consistent in the practice that is given to you to do. But I've been very happy today to have this chance to share with you, and we still have a few minutes in case there are any questions or thoughts. I'd be very happy to hear from you.
Thank you, Ziaji. That was most wonderful. I think if people have questions, maybe they can just put it in the chat, and we'll see as it comes. As you mentioned at the opening, that we share spiritual ancestors, that in the Natapanthi order, several of Mahasiddhas, such as Kanapa, Krishnacharya, who's credited with transmitting the Lamdre, the pure vision tradition, was also recognized as one of the Natapanthis. And oftentimes I have suggested that the Mahasiddhas, although within the Buddhist tantric system, 84 of them, that they don't actually belong to any particular school, that Siddhas are truly beings who have transcended in some ways lineages and schools and systems. And we all sort of have shared ownership in some ways of their knowledge. And just last week, when we were discussing some text on Buddha nature, I had sort of said that it's a secret wish that perhaps in one of the previous incarnations, that all of us are transported to Kashmir between the 9th and 12th century, when all the different traditions were coming together and sharing notes in their pursuit of truth, in their pursuit of understanding. So it's such a delight to have you and have this conversation. I'm just going to take maybe a couple of questions. One was as a practitioner, what would you suggest some of the sort of motivations that might drive the day-to-day aspiration to engage in such practices?
Yeah, that's a wonderful question. The motivation. For me, this practice has become something as basic, as natural as brushing my teeth in the morning. When I get up in the morning, I'm not going to miss brushing my teeth. I would never think to skip doing that. It has to be done. And this practice is like that for me. It's just such an essential purification. One wants to be clean. And first thing in the morning, one has to cleanse oneself. So if one feels that deep desire to prepare oneself for the day by cleaning oneself, and one is given a practice that is simple, that is clear, it doesn't take too much time, and you know that you can, whatever is going on in your life, you can begin your day with that. It gives a tremendous foundation, because we're going to be facing so many complications and distractions in the course of the day. So it's so important that we begin with a solid foundation. And there's some who have the opportunity and who have the, let's say, motivation to maintain a very extensive body of practices each morning. But that isn't possible for everyone. So it's good to have something simple that you can do, and you can say that, come what may, I'll do this one thing because it's for my own purification. It's to get in touch with my breath, to connect with the world around me in a manner that's in the mode of pure witnessing. And so that's the motivation that moves me to do this practice every day.
Thank you. In one of the talks, one of the conversations earlier in the series, we had discussed about this particular aspect of oscillation that we humans, especially uh, in the conventional reality of things, we constantly find ourselves oscillating between multiple realities, of course, of our choosing in certain ways. Um, any suggestion, any advice on spiritual practice being sort of the breath of life or a driver versus what many may perceive as an add on? It is just something nice to do or something that we add on to our regular routine of doing things, just another activity, as opposed to an activity that may drive everything else in life.
Oh, yes, that's a wonderful question. And it reminds me that when we go to sleep at night, we recede back from our diurnal personality. In the daytime, we have a certain persona. We are such and such a person who has this name, who has this form, who is a father or an employee or whatever it might be. We have this fixed identity. And then in the night, it's like we fold that up and put it to the side and go down into the world of dreams and then into dreamless sleep. And so we've gone into another world. It's not a world far away, it's right here, but it's the inner dimension of this outer world. But then when we wake up, we've forgotten all about that and we just rush off to the affairs of the day. And so we become a kind of split personality. We have these two faces, the nighttime face and the daytime face, and they don't know each other. The deep sleep self doesn't know the waking self, and the waking self doesn't know the deep sleep self, let alone the dreaming self. So this consciousness of the breath, this wakefulness, this entering into an integration of the multiple levels of being that we can cultivate in spiritual practice is not something that's just done as a hobby or it's done to feel good. It's something fundamental to wholeness, to being whole in our experience, so that we're not divided up so much in ourselves, but we're weaving together all of the strands of our human experience.
Thank you. Um, you had touched on this during the meditation itself, but could you elaborate a bit more on notions of subtle body um, uh, from your perspective?
Yes, that's a very good question. That's wonderful. Well, from the Sufi perspective, um, what we call manifestation, which is the disclosure of the hidden treasure that at some level of being is unknown, containing all possibilities, but totally inaccessible because there is no contact between subject and object. There is just a pure oneness that makes any kind of encounter impossible. So out of that secrecy, out of that mystery emerges this longing for revelation, for witnessing, for the unfolding discovery of what is. And so the manifestation unfolds itself as a sequence of planes of being. And the innermost planes are closest to that profound mystery where there are hardly yet traces of form. It's still a state of almost formlessness or protean form, just the most archetypal, primordial components of being. But being gradually elaborates itself, embodies itself, manifests itself to that horizon in which we find ourselves now in this sensory world, which gives the appearance of separate objects and 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 distinguishable forms that are mutually interacting. But if we step back from that appearance or sink in, let's say, sink into our own being, we see that this picture that we have of ourselves as something bounded and separate and monolithic is soon betrayed by sensations of contraction and expansion, breath flowing in and out, the rhythms that mutually resonate between ourselves, processes of reflection, all kinds of entanglements that connect us with all other beings. And then we start to discover through the breath, through the heartbeat, an identity or a sense of a sensory field, which isn't so much based on the external senses as it's based on a refinement of those senses leading into internal senses, internal vibrations. And then you discover something like an electric body. And then beyond that, you discover something like an emotional body, a psychic body. And deeper, even embedded within that, something like an angelic body, a luminous body. And beyond that, a body of pure consciousness. So all of these bodies are not, they're not things that are accrued, they're already there, but they're dormant within us until we connect to those levels of perception.
Thank you. Perhaps one last question, and I can ask this of you because you're also so familiar with the Buddhist tradition. One of the sort of central themes in Buddhist tradition is this idea of bodhicitta, this awakened mind, altruistic mind, that also is sort of used as a fuel for one's practice. That with this aspiration that you know that may I be enlightened for the benefit of all sentient beings, which is sort of the underlying theme of bodhicitta. Are there things akin to that in the Sufi tradition, or that allows us to sort of experience this this worldview of interdependence in a more kinder and compassionate manner?
Yes, thank you for that. That is something I admire so deeply in the Buddhist tradition. The emphasis on compassion and the bodhisattva vocation, which means, of course, not merely pursuing one's own salvation, but seeking to be of service to all beings in their liberation from suffering and in their awakening. And that is something that resonates powerfully in Sufism. And in our own lineage can be traced back to a figure that no doubt is familiar to you, Venerable, and that is Khwaja Moinuddin Chishti, whose dargah is in Ajmer Sharif in Rajasthan. And there was a vision, a dervish had a vision of Khwaja Moinuddin Chishti and saw that Khwaja Moinuddin Chishti was not in the garden. He wasn't in paradise, in the hereafter. One would expect a great saint such as he would be right in the middle of the divine paradise. But instead he was outside, standing by the gate. And And so the dervish who was dreaming said, how is this? Why is it that you aren't in paradise? And he said, not until my murids, my disciples, and their murids, their disciples, and their murids, not until all of them are in paradise will I enter myself. So it's really that vow that that we undertake. Whatever we undertake, it's not for our own salvation, but it's because we can't distinguish ourselves anyway from everyone else, that we're all in this together. And the motive of love means we want to be of service to each and every one.
That's very much like the vow of Avalokiteshvara, Bodhisattva. Speaking of Ajmer, that I had the privilege of visiting many a times. Several years ago, His Holiness the Dalai Lama was invited to visit the Dargah of Moinuddin Chishti in Ajmer. And then right after that visit, he had to fly to the US immediately after. And so he arrived in, I think it was in at Lehigh University in Pennsylvania. And he was to give a teaching on Lamrim. And he came straight here, the flight landed in JFK and he drove straight to the venue, to the stadium of 15,000 or so, to deliver the teaching in Lamrim. And as soon as he took his seat, he said, he smelled his robes and he said, this still smells like Ajmer. He was so enamored by the devotional practices there and the incense and so on, that his entire robes was still steeped in the fragrance of the incense, and it was quite wonderful that he came straight from the airport and the first statement he made, of my robes, they smell of Ajmer.
Smell of roses, especially, the
Yes.
heat of those roses on the tombs, and just the clouds of fragrance of roses just wells up all around, and you just, as it were, delve into that aroma.
Certainly. Very true. Very true. Well, thank you so very much, Ziaji. I want to be mindful of time, and I do hope that we shall have another opportunity to have you and to learn from you. And thank you so very much again. And I wish you safe and healthy times ahead.
Thank you so much, dear Venerable. What a joy and honor to be with you and to meet your friends here. And you are always in my prayers, and I wish each of you well, each of you who has been here today. Wonderful to meet you, and may your path be well lit, and let's all stay safe. Thank you.